Every morning at sunrise, Kashmiri farmers gather at Srinagar's famous floating market on Dal Lake. Muhammad Sadiq Khan paddles half a mile to get there from his home to the other side of the water. Just a decade ago, Muhammad would have met up with hundreds of other sellers. These days, though, there are just a few dozen left. Most of their families have traded here for generations. Srinagar's floating market has survived decades of conflict, political upheaval, and natural disasters. But today, the lake itself is at risk. Sewage dumping and pollution are suffocating the waters farmers depend on. We went to Dal Lake in Indian-administered Kashmir to find out how this floating market is still standing.
Market Shabaji, Swadish, Padua market gas, concert.
Roughly 60,000 people depend on Dal Lake for their livelihoods. Many work in tourism and fishing. But the lake's agriculture is one of its most important industries. On this cold winter morning, Muhammad picks up collard greens to sell.
Subject best.
What makes them unique is how they're grown. People began farming inside the lake centuries ago. Over time, generations of farmers passed down their methods. These floating gardens are called Rad in Kashmiri. Some grow naturally, others are artificial. Farmers weave together wetland plants and bring up the roots and soil from the bottom of the lake to layer into what is essentially a floating mat. They plant collard leaves, turnips, carrots, and other produce. But the market's most popular crop actually grows under the water. The lotus root, locally known as nadru, is used in many Kashmiri dishes. And Dal Lake is considered one of the region's best producers.
The
floating market runs every day for 2 hours, even in the dead of winter. Farmers wear an iconic woolen overcoat called a peran to keep warm. They share a traditional Kashmiri green tea called kahwa that's mixed with cinnamon, cardamom, and saffron. And they wait for shopkeepers who travel from the city to buy their vegetables. It's a ritual that has been going on for at least 100 years.
The market
Floating markets like this one were once a central part of life across Asia. They date back to the 14th century, but most still around today are less than 200 years old. They popped up in places like Vietnam, Thailand, and parts of India, where rivers, wetlands, and coastlines were the main routes for transporting people and goods. So trading on the water made a lot of sense. But as infrastructure improved and roads were built in these areas, vendors started to move their goods by land. By the mid-20th century, floating markets throughout Asia became tourist attractions, like Dal Lake's market. visitors filled the hundreds of houseboats lining the lake. They'd take rides in small boats called shikaras to get an up-close look at the floating market. By the 1980s, tourism became a thriving industry.
Yet when you're tourist are not ज़्यादा, वो बनाए शिकारी, मुझे नहीं ना शिकारी, मैं जो shooting में वो था, जो था, खाना करने भी या पूरे सब पत्ते रहा, शुमन बड़ा
But Kashmir lies on a political and religious fault line, and that has made it hard to keep attracting visitors. India and Pakistan began to fight over the territory after they gained independence from British rule in 1947. Unrest flared up again in the 1990s, and fighting between separatists and Indian security forces drove most tourists away. Despite ongoing conflict, farmers here kept growing and selling produce from their boats every morning for decades. But in 2014, devastating floods brought everything to a halt for the first time in the market's history.
It was sorry, it was because my makan pe aum thi.
Dal Lake was virtually deserted. The market stopped.
Dal Lake am su ko ab di kharab. Ye nadir zemin ho ko am si kharab.
It took farmers months to recover. Eventually, more than a year later, things began to pick up again. But as Srinagar's population grew, so did its environmental problems. By the 1980s, locals were complaining about the sewage being dumped from hundreds of houseboats. Studies show they're one of the lake's biggest polluters.
Inni aban kar sabzi kharab. अच्छा houseboat बोलती लेटरिंग, बैठ बोलती लेटरिंग, सोए सी लेटरिंग की लेटरिंग, ऐसी के सब्जी खराब, उनको पोल्यूशन अंदर, ज़मीन को खराब.
But that's just one part of a massive waste problem. The government admitted that more than 44 million liters of sewage from the city was being dumped into the lake every day. That's enough to fill more than 17 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
ना वोट लगा वन, आज बहने सुकावन किया.
The government announced it would connect all houseboats to sewage plants last year. It banned plastic on the lakeshore and ordered mechanical dredgers to scoop out invasive weeds and other kinds of waste. But even a cleaned-up Dal Lake would still face yet another challenge.
लोकल बच्चे पारान, निम्चे नहीं लाई करा उनके किया, निम्चे पारने किस पायस.
Mohammed says farming hasn't been profitable enough to entice the next generation. In fact, some vegetables cost him more to grow than what he can sell them for. And competition has grown fierce.
It was a rush. It when you pinchumudi to the park. That's one gamatan hun mall. Load kare and care, red and care, guardian care.
It's why many farmers are unsure about the future of the market. Some have left farming or work other jobs just to get by.
Kurbazaz akat pishus filali ay kam karan. Bungotes karan misal gara se boz da dashwe se sin karan. Azay man thoda garibi thi achini man khas kihin.
Mohammed makes just enough to care for himself and his wife Salima Jan. But he refuses to let that discourage him. He has hope that the lake, its floating gardens, and the market will survive.
वक्त वाज जाए साफ, फर्स्ट क्लास साफ. इन्ना बात है. फिलहाल, पता नहीं खुदा वानी करी. खुदा ऐसे अच्छे सो रहे.